Before there was a brain, there was a body. Long before anything resembling a human mind existed, simple creatures were already alive, already moving, already surviving, with nothing more than a scattered web of nerve cells to guide them. Your brain isn't some crowning achievement that appeared out of nowhere. It's the end result of hundreds of millions of years of trial and error, built layer upon layer on top of far older, far simpler systems that were solving far more basic problems like digestion, movement, and staying alive long enough to reproduce. Some of the most human things about you, your intelligence, your impulse control, even the differences between how men and women's brains tend to work, and possibly even conditions like anxiety and depression, may trace back to evolutionary pressures older than the species itself. So let's actually trace that story. From simple nerve nets in ancient sea creatures, all the way up to the astonishingly complex organs sitting inside your skull right now. Bodies came before brains. Here's the detail most people get backwards. Bodies existed before brains did. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio makes the case in his book, The Strange Order of Things, that the brain and nervous system didn't originally evolve to rule the body. They evolved to serve it, helping the organism stay in the kind of stable internal conditions it needed to survive and thrive. In other words, the body wasn't built as a servant to the brain. It may have been the other way around entirely. Damasio points to something telling. The nervous system running your digestive organs, often called the enteric nervous system, or informally, the second brain, operates with a surprising degree of independence from the brain in your head. Coordinating digestion is genuinely complex, and it's also fundamental to survival. So it's not hard to see why a species that evolved a dedicated system just to manage it would gain a real advantage. In fact, some researchers believe this gut-based nervous system may have actually been the first kind of brain to evolve. Not a backup system, but the original. There's real evidence for this. Cnidarians, the group that includes jellyfish, among the oldest animal lineages still alive today, have no head brain at all. Instead, they run on something called a nerve net, which looks remarkably similar to the nervous system found in our own gut. That simple network is enough to let them move and coordinate a basic form of digestion, essentially just contracting muscles to pull food into a simple body. Neuroscience researcher Taylor Guthrie has described the evolving nervous system almost like a kind of biological government, a cellular republic in his words. As species evolved, the nervous system appears to have followed something like a hierarchy of needs, first solving the basic physiological problems of keeping communities of cells alive and fed, then gradually developing mechanisms for safety and threat detection. That's reflected directly in brain anatomy. The oldest brain regions tend to handle basic physiological regulation, while structures like the locus coeruleus and midbrain, which came a bit later, are far more involved in orienting the body toward danger and reacting to it. From fish brains to human brains. Once brains existed and had been evolving for a while, the fossil and genetic record traces a clear lineage. Humans descended from an ancestor shared with chimpanzees, which in turn descended from earlier mammals, which descended from reptiles, which descended from fish. Lining up the brains of these groups side by side reveals something striking. A 2016 comparative study by Dennis and Oleg Grudinin illustrated the same core structures, cerebral cortex, cerebellum, brainstem, and renencephalon, present across fish, reptiles, mammals, and humans. But the proportions shift dramatically. In a fish brain, the vast majority of the volume is brainstem. In a human brain, the vast majority is cerebral cortex. Neuroscientist Jeff Hawkins offers a useful rough framework here. Split the brain into two functional camps. There's the neocortex, sometimes just called the new brain, which handles complex thought, perception, and deliberate action, and makes up most of the human cerebral cortex. And then there are the subcortical structures, the old brain, including the brainstem, which manage bodily regulation, movement execution, and raw, unfiltered emotion. What makes the neocortex special? The neocortex has a genuinely elegant architecture that makes it flexible enough to do so much. Picture a quilt made from one repeating pattern, spaced evenly across its entire surface. That repeating unit is called a cortical column. Roughly 100 neurons arranged into a tight column, spanning from the top of the neocortex down to its underside. Hawkins argues each individual cortical column effectively models a small piece of the external or internal world, and that the entire quilt of columns together builds something like a working model of reality as experienced by that particular brain. He believes this is the actual neurological root of intelligence, and that a species' general intelligence level correlates strongly with how many cortical columns its neocortex contains. So as you move up the evolutionary ladder from fish to humans, the neocortex doesn't just grow, it explodes in size, likely bringing a corresponding explosion in cognitive capability along with it. Human cortex, in fact, is so large it has to fold and crumple in on itself, just to physically fit inside the skull. The prefrontal cortex and self-control. One region in particular stands out as especially developed in humans. The prefrontal cortex, sitting right at the front of the brain. This is largely the region responsible for our ability to override or delay basic impulses. Hunger, desire, instant gratification of all kinds. Along with its connected networks, the prefrontal cortex handles what neuroscientists call cognitive control, which cognitive neuroscientist David Baudry describes essentially as the brain's mechanism for translating goals, plans, and intentions into actual action, bridging the gap between what we know and what we do. Why did this capacity evolve at all? Baudry points to two key functions it enables. First, generative flexible behavior, the ability to tackle tasks we've genuinely never encountered before. The brain as a whole, not a hierarchy. It's worth being careful here, though. The line between old brain and new brain is blurrier than it sounds. The hippocampus, central to memory of people, places, and events, is also deeply involved in emotion. Computational neuroscientist Mark Humphreys points to a classic set of studies from the 1980s and 90s, in which researchers surgically removed the entire cortex from rats and observed them for months. Your brain isn't a finished product. It's a layered, patched-together history of every problem your ancestors ever had to solve, just to stay alive. If this kind of deep dive into where your mind actually came from interests you, subscribe. There's a lot more of this story left to uncover.